There's going to be two parts to just talking about the theory. Go figure. Two parts to that. First, inheritance is needed when there are multiple classes that are very similar in nature. Now, number one, you may not be using multiple classes that are similar. So I don't want you to think that suddenly this topic, you're going to be using this topic for every single item that you're going to do in programming. You might not. Even in data structures, which is an advanced class here, you might not have a project that uses inheritance. So there's a very specific case of when this would be useful. And, well, frankly, again, when we get to multiple classes similar in nature, if we had employees, I am an employee, I'm a full-time professor, and then even when there's an adjunct or a part-time professor, there's going to be some data, if we were to store it, that's going to be shared between the two of us, but obviously notice the difference between the two. This is a prime candidate of using inheritance. Again, you might not have this situation set up, so you may not use inheritance. So again, just to make sure that's clear. We're not suddenly using it the whole time. Now, there is an relationship when we get to this. A part-time professor is an employee. A full-time professor is an employee. There is an relationship to this. So an employee is not an animal. Feels like some days. But anyway, so there has to be a legit relationship. There has to be a legitimate item where all of these happen to share some data that would be throughout maybe some other and secretary and janitor. They have first names, last names. So there's going to be a lot of similarities between some classes that all relate to an is-and relationship in all this. Now, what you're going to start seeing me do here is starting to break down from basically some condition, I hate to use condition, but that's true, stop-it situation, where we can start breaking this up using inheritance. We're using inheritance frankly because we're lazy. We don't want to have the same duplication over again for something that we might be using, well, for a lot of different objects that are all related in some fashion. Inheritance is meant to make our job easier in the long run. So I'll show you how next. What we're going to do next is that we are going to create a superclass and a couple, in this example, of base or sub or derived classes. Notice that we have taken out the common bits from each of these and made this a base class. So every employee, no matter what they are, full-time professor, part-time professor, secretary, janitor, whatever, they're all going to have a last name, first name, social security, All of them are going to have that. But then we get to specialize those things that are different for those particular objects. Now here's the beautiful part. I don't have to code that section back in part-time professor. I don't have to code this section in full-time professor or any other ones. It's going to inherit all of the items that I only need to code once in a base class, and by some trickery in C++, it's really simple to be honest, we can include the other items in it using inheritance. So we're still going to be using a complete class profile. We're going to have accessors, mutators, constructors, all of that stuff is in there. That's still exactly the same what you've done before. But again, we're actually going to inherit some predefined items for us because we're lazy. That's what inheritance is meant for if we can do it. The subclasses themselves may be much smaller than the base class. Look, part-time professor is going to be pretty small. Now, look at full-time professor. It's about the same size when we get to coding and stuff like that. So it doesn't matter. All we're trying to do is not have to code the same green inherited section over and over and over again. That's all we're going to do. And back to the red here. Not every application is going to suddenly use inheritance. It's a very particular scenario, like I've talked about before. And again, if talking about the design, yes, there is a thoughtful design we have to think about when we talk about this. It may not fit. Not every application is going to fit this. So just a heads up, inheritance is useful, but you may not use it.